Good afternoon. It's lovely to see you all. My name is Kristy Matheson. I'm the Artistic Director of the BFI London Film Festival, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with you all and, of course, with Mark Cousins, who is a Scottish-Irish filmmaker and writer. His 24 feature-length films include titles such as Story of Film and Odyssey, The March on Rome, The Eyes of Orson Welles, My Name is Alfred Hitchcock, and Women Make Film, among many others. And these films have travelled widely across the globe, winning awards and premiering in festivals such as Festival du Cannes, where we are today, Berlin, Sundance, Venice, Toronto, among countless others. And Mark's most recent writing is a book called Dear Orson Welles and Other Essays, which is a cracking read, so I would suggest you get out there and get that. Mark is here today in Cannes with his latest work, which is the story of documentary film. So would you please give a very warm welcome to Mark? And before we get started, for those listening to us online, we're going to do a visual description. So I am a short white lady with messy bun hair and all in black.
I thought you said messy bum, but it's bun.
It is also messy.
I like the idea of messy bum hair. So I'm Irish, slightly older guy, wearing a black kilt and a black T-shirt that says, "Documentary kills fascism."
I love this. So before we sort of get started today, the story of film is an ambitious, detailed and eclectic look at the history of documentary, and it really traces the form from its earliest days right up until the present. It's incredibly global in its reach and in its view. But what's really great about the film is, you know, that you're really unearthing many filmmakers, especially a lot of female filmmakers who've been overlooked in the form. And so as you watch it, the 15 parts?
16 hours.
So as you watch it, it's chronologically structured, but there's many thematics that come through each, you know, the episode. So it's a very pleasurable watch. I'm currently making my way through it and loving it.
Thank you.
And Mark, here in Cannes, you last night presented the 70s.
1970s,
is that right?
yes.
In the Buñuel. So can you tell us a little bit about what that amazing experience is like?
It's always nerve-wracking presenting a film. You know, I want to run and hide, but it was lovely last night. Cannes is so international, Kristy, as you know, and what we showed yesterday was an awful lot to do with Japanese cinema and Indian cinema of the 70s, documentary films, and serious stuff like quite difficult material, etc. But at the end of the screening, one of the best clips we showed was from an Indian film in the 60s by Vinod Chopra, a great producer, director. And at the end, this woman came up to me and she said, "I'm married to him." And then another guy, an older Bengali gentleman, said, you know, I think he said his wife edited one of the films, like only in Cannes. I mean, my goodness. I mean, it's kind of remarkable that, you know, that kind of global sense of what cinema is, which my producer here, John Archer, and I tried to do in the work, is kind of affirmed in this space.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. You sort of, the whole world is here, but the whole world is in your film. And today we're going to have a very special, for those in the room, for those listening, you will have to use your imagination for visuals. But as a really rare and special treat, today we're going to go on a journey through documentary form from the UK.
Yeah.
And Mark has compiled a series of extraordinary films. Some of them you will know, some of them I know, some of them I don't know. So, Mark, I believe you have a fantastic PowerPoint.
We've got some images.
You have a clicker, and that's going to be great.
A clicker, I really love a clicker. And so the idea here is not to talk maybe about the most famous British films ever made. So you're not going to see Seven Up, for example. You're not going to see The Death of Yugoslavia, the great series produced by Norma Percy. You're not going to see Adam Curtis even. I've just chosen some things about the imagery in documentaries, Kristy, not so much the content, the imagery. And so there behind us is the first one, Conway Castle, 1899, North Wales. And is it okay? It's okay if I, are you going to sit or stand? So like look at this, for example. This is what's called a phantom ride. So the camera's tracking along here. And doesn't this look like a watercolor? And the reason it looks like a watercolor is because it's hand painted. But it looks like butterfly wings, that color, that flickering quality, you know. So, these first documentaries in the history of cinema were just saying a very simple thing: look what's out there. Look at, for the first time, we can see the magnificence of this castle from, I think, the 1480s, and see what it looks like on camera, you know. So that now we're jumping to listen to Britain. So now we're in World War II, and which is quite a leap. We're gone nearly 50 years, and this is Humphrey Jennings and Stuart McAllister's brilliant film, and it's trying to say something very interesting. At a time of war, when we're fighting the Nazis, the myth of unified Britain, you know, like we're all in this together.
And is this kind of, you know, when you get to this point, especially around war, I guess you're seeing this all across the globe, where people are using the documentary form
as a cohesive force, as a kind of cement to hold things together. And a lovely, gentle lady looking out the window, listening to Britain, listening to the sounds of birds in summer, of factories, of farms, etc. It's a kind of poetic idea that we, whatever our difference is, we are all in this together. That's another image from the film. So this is the National Gallery sort of Scotland, in London, and look at her listening. This is a gentle face, and behind her is a Uccello painting, a picture of war. But that sense that maybe a way to understand Britain is to use your ears. And you know, this is a fantasy, but at a time of increased division in society, this film is super moving. Yeah. So, you know, and then from the 1940s to the 1950s, war is over now. And we're in Scotland, we're in Orkney, and Margaret Tate, the great filmmaker Margaret Tate, who was in the war. She was a nurse in the war, but now she's gone to Centro Sperimentale in Rome and studied documentary. And what does she do? She photographs her mother opening a sticky boiled sweet. You know, those that sort of stick in your teeth, and it's like a Rembrandt painting.
But her work, I mean, I think especially as a figure in documentary in general, but in the UK, I mean, she's such a pivotal and important character that hangs all this together.
She had the courage to be domestic. You know, at this time, as you know, it's a bit of a boys' club that we're going in here, and some of these filmmakers felt that they had to talk about big national subjects. She's saying, I want to talk about the back of my mother's head, who, by the way, has this kind of haircut in the film that you have. And I want to talk about her, you know, eating a boiled sweet. So that kind of, this is, the personal is political before we got to actually the movement, which was the personal political. So Margaret Tate is an extremely important figure, I think, for British cinema. So we went from the 40s to the 50s to, again, in the 1950s, a very different film. Does anybody recognize this one? Some of you do. Oh, Dreamland, Lindsay Anderson. So almost exactly the same time as that, but this film, where that one is gentle, this one is ironic. This is filmed in Margate. Lindsay Anderson, born in India, wonderful filmmaker, as you know, like quite posh, shall we say, you know. Angry, you worked with John Archer, worked with him, you know, a difficult man, you know, didn't accept his sexuality, etc. He goes to working class Margate, and one of the first images is this grimace, you know, and is he celebrating? No, he's doing something else. Look at that image, you know, and he, over this moment, there's a song called I Believe It, you know, that song. But Lindsay Anderson's saying, I don't believe in working class solidarity. You know, so it's a challenge, a kind of spiky challenge to us.
And when he makes this film, I mean, is there a sense of how do people take this film when they're seeing it at the time?
It was seen as part of a movement. You know, things were happening in France at this time. You know, young people or newer filmmakers were coming along doing something fresh and not bourgeois. And so in Britain, there was a movement of filmmakers like him and others who were doing something similar. So this film was celebrated. And it's called Oh Dreamland, you know, and was Britain a dreamland? Certainly it was here. You know, but is it still in the 1950s, when the war is over, when we don't have to pull together, is it still a dreamland, you know? And that's what this film is great, 1953, and, You know, it's the opposite of what I believe. It's a work of cynicism, I think, and pessimism, John. I don't know if you would agree, but it's remarkably fresh because it's not sentimental about what Britishness is. And by this time, we're trying to talk about what is Britishness. You know, we've already been to Scotland, you know, so what is this Britishness thing that Lindsay Anderson's talking about? Irish? George Best, yeah. I'm playing for Manchester United. This is a Coventry game from 1971. Comes from exactly my part of the world, working class superstar. And so this looks like a conventional type of image, but also from this film is this image. Look how blurry it is. This is a German director. And what does he do? He doesn't film the ball. He doesn't film the match. Society is completely out of focus. This is about a man and his body. Like there's an eroticism here, you know, and
it's so, almost Zidane before Zidane.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
The Zidane film by Douglas Gordon was a direct remake of this. Those of you who have seen the Zidane film, you'll remember it's just about Zinedine Zidane's body. You don't follow the match, which as a non-sports fan, I'm thrilled.
No, I really liked that film a lot. I was like, I won't get this.
I really don't care. But you follow this man and see how his body moves in the shallow spoken. We've got a great cinematographer here, KJ, and you know when you use a long focus lens, you get this out of focus, but it's almost like a painting. This film, you know, and 1971, and so if we're saying that a lot of these films were about society, this film is definitely not about society. This is about the male body floating in space, you know, and yeah.
And the person that makes this film, do you feel like they're coming from the point of view of being an artist?
Yes.
And bringing that to the so bringing something quite different to the documentary form.
Yeah, the outsider eye, a German going to England, photographing a Northern Irish guy. You know, he's an outsider. I don't think he's interested in the social context where this guy came from, for example. He's interested in the colour and a sort of art, you know, sort of
framing of the
framing and the aesthetics, and that's exciting. And we all, as documentary filmmakers, have to acknowledge the aesthetics in what we do, whether we like it or not. You know, it's not only about content. And the reason I chose this is a good reminder in 1971 that it's not only about content. Then this is Handsworth Songs, you know, a really important John O'Confra's film. By the time we're 1980s, Margaret Thatcher is in our lives, and she said there's no such thing as society, only men and women and their families. And this is a police officer, and this is in Birmingham, yeah. And the police officer, what happens here is he runs forward and starts to try to hit this guy, and this guy runs. And this film is great politically, because it's speaking to some of the problems of Thatcher and racism, but
also the artistry of this filmmaker in particular. And I mean, it's lovely to see these stills because you really get a sense of the form of these films. And this shot, I mean, the composition of this shot is impeccable.
Yeah, and I thought, you know, we could have used film clips today, moving imagery, but it's really nice to just pause and look at the image and what's in the image, isn't it? And as you say, O'Confra and his team, the Black Audio Collective, they used collage techniques, you know, so stills, material a dead shot, archive footage, etc., to say in a way that our lives are like a collage. It's complex and it's memory material and it's the rawness of the moment, etc.
And just to see this level of like conflict being inflicted on civilians, and then behind it you have this very middle class, very like this. It's just a street. It's just a suburban street.
Yeah. You know, and this film was very influential, and it had to. You know, I think what happened in many societies is when you've got roughly an authoritarian government like we have in, let's say, India or the US or Turkey or many places. This forces the filmmakers to find solutions, including visual solutions. And this film was. I remember seeing it and thought, my goodness, you know. So you know that unity going way. That unity that we were pretending we had, maybe we did have during World War II, but by the 1980s, we've got a very divisive political regime which is forcing us apart. You know, and trying to say, that's the enemy, or that's the enemy. Yeah. And it's trying to say to us...
be afraid.
Be afraid. You're on your knees, and the people who are keeping on your knees are these young black boys. You know, and if we can get rid of them, then the problem is solved. Home from the Hill. This is Molly's film, isn't it? Yeah. Has anybody seen Home from the Hill? Yeah. Yeah, you remember it. So this guy is, I can't remember his name, but he's an... Harry Hill, yeah. Who said Harry? You said that, yeah. So he's an old colonial. He was in the regime, the Raj in India. He's a hunter. We start in Kenya, and he's got a huge estate, and he's sitting with his gin and tonic, and he's watching, African people mow his lawn, and then suddenly he's evicted, and we're in his house in the UK, and he's got a tin of ravioli in his hand, and he can't open it. And again, we're 1980s, again Thatcher, again a political regime that is celebrating power and very elite, and yet this old gentleman who's a hunter, and we should hate him, he couldn't open his tin of ravioli, and he goes, "Oh, for God's sake, can somebody help me?" And Molly, I think it's Molly, says, "No, you have to learn to open your own tin of ravioli." And then the sound recordist, I can't remember her name, she says, "Switch it on," because there's an electric tin opener, And as a result of this was, what was this called? That 40 Minutes, John? It was a TV show, a BBC TV show called 40 Minutes. And it was revelatory, this, because it was a great empathy film, this. Even though he's done horrible things, we still care about him. He can't feed himself. And he got loads, when it was aired, he got loads of offers from women to marry him.
Wow.
Hillary Hook, yeah. Harry Hill, I was going to say, that's a very different comedian, yeah. But anyway, it's a really great film, I think, and I think Molly's really great at looking into the areas where it was easy to be leftist in the 80s, to be countercultural, but to do a portrait of this right-wing figure and humanize him was really special. And now this one is called When the Dog Bites, which is by Penny Woolcott. Anybody seen When the Dog Bites? Yeah, do you remember it? I mean, it's really great. And Penny, this is Penny's, she considers this her first serious film. We're high up here. We're in Consett in northeast England. 35% unemployment. It's a steel town. 3,000 people made unemployed. So abject social deprivation. And what does she do?
Are these fireworks?
Fireworks. So the camera's really high, and we start like this, and it starts to drop, and you think, this is the beginning of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. The tracking shot, and the fireworks go off, and you think, my goodness, this isn't social realism, this isn't observational cinema, this is not Albert Maysles or something like that. And then a moment later, we have this. I took these as screen grabs, so they're not great, but this, anybody guess what this is? This is the shadow of the Steadicam. I think one of the first times a Steadicam had been used, to my knowledge, in a documentary. Steadicam was seen as something about glamour, wasn't it, and floatingness, and a kind of. But here it was in a documentary. No cut. The camera keeps going, and then we follow these people. She's dressed in a kind of leopard skin bodysuit, as you do, and in this pretty deprived part of the world, people realize there's a camera crew in town, therefore we're going to show up. So still, I mean, this 80s moment, that's 3 films now from the 1980s, a big moment, Kristy, yeah?
And in terms of technology, people have, obviously they're moving to much smaller cameras now. Were these shot on tape? Were these film?
This was on tape, yeah. And then at the same time, the BBC had, what was it called, John, when the video diaries? It was called video diaries, isn't it? Yeah. So they started to give cameras to actual people who don't identify as filmmakers, and of course that changed a lot. And the history of cinema is about handing the means of production over to somebody who's not trained in this and not being told from childhood, you can be an artist. Yeah. And maybe then that's very good. It is very good to give people like that these kind of cameras. Nick Broomfield. with his famous his famous pole, shall we say, sound recordist, you know, and Eugène Terre Blanche. This is South Africa. It's just after Nelson Mandela has been released from prison, and this is a famous film called The Leader, His Driver, and the Driver's Wife. And this is innovation, I think. You know, this is about this guy trying to get an interview with this guy, far right, trying to challenge him on what's changing in South African society, as you know.
And there's I mean, you know, with his films, you know, when you first see Nick Broomfield's films, it's the first time I remember where the filmmaker is unashamedly putting themselves in the space, not trying to pretend that this is not constructed. Like these films, the construction is right front and center.
Yeah, and that came. You're right. He's very in it. You know, things were happening in Canada before this, and France, of course, and the US, and other places, Denmark, where filmmakers were starting to say, "Look, I'm not claiming objectivity here. I'm going to put myself in and show my vulnerability." And boy, does Nick show his vulnerability, because in this film he's been begging for an interview with this guy, and then he finally gets it, and he's late. And he gets really pissed off with him, and rightly so. You know, if you're begging for an interview, show up. But Nick's brilliant vibe is slightly posh boy, slightly, you know, I'm in
slightly maverick,
you know, a Levi's commercial type thing, you know, and so through charm and things like that. So this was a key moment in British documentary. You okay? Are you okay? So this was a key moment, and of course Nick made other films like this, and lots of other people tried to copy that style.
Very much so. Like you get a sense that he's not the first person to do this, but he sort of becomes a figure that then there are lots of copies of his films.
Yeah, and it's kind of iconic in some way. Marcel Ophuls is doing it, brilliantly in France, and then Michael Moore comes along and turns it into a whole shtick, and a brilliant shtick, I think. So that, and it's really honest, this approach, I think. Like I'm showing that I'm not, like, all the prep is not off screen, all the mistakes are not off screen.
Yeah, and being the sound recordist as well is unusual. The one person you never ever see in a frame, and so that's also kind of...
Yeah, I think so. Gallivant of Andrew Cotting. This is... how many people have seen Gallivant of Andrew Cotting? Some of you, yeah. I mean, it's so good, isn't it? This is the very opening of the film, and it starts in an almost mythical way. When we think of those earlier films and saying, we're all in this together, us Brits, the Scots, the Irish, the Welsh, we're all sort of socially cohesive. This film starts with the very moment when, like in ancient times, when Britain becomes an island. The waters rise, and suddenly Britain becomes an island. And what does that mean? So Andrew makes this brilliant film about his grandmother and daughter traveling clockwise around the coast, meeting unusual people, trying to say, what is it that we have in common? And it's always a good question.
Yeah.
And people from the right have one answer, and from the left have an answer, But this was one of the most innovative films of the 90s, I think,
And do you remember with this film, do you remember the first time you saw it? Was it on television? Like, how did you...
I was director of the Edinburgh Film Festival, and we gave it its world premiere, and it got the main prize. And, because it was filmed so interesting, it was shot on 35mm with interviews, lip sync, but also 8mm, speeded up, slowed down, no lip sync, and so the detachment of sound and image. I think there's already a theme here where we're talking about sound, listen to Britain, Nick, the sound recordist, and this one, I think sound in British cinema has been like a really sort of a potent theme, a potent a way of pushing people creatively. Divorce Iranian style. I just wanted to put that sense that our filmmakers are also outwardly directed. They have a centrifugal imagination. We're not only making stories about our own complex cultures in the UK, but this is the fantastic film about the Iran court, the divorce case. And this brilliantly articulate woman is saying there's a judge here, we're off camera, and she's saying to the judge, look, I've done everything he's told me. I'm not even allowed to answer the phone on my own. So it's one of those films where, because Britain had an empire and because it controlled parts of the world, it had a duty, therefore, its filmmakers felt that it had a duty to actually ask, what is it beyond our borders, and how can we learn from those people?
And I think especially with this filmmaker, Kim Long-Janotto, the incredible film she makes about Japanese wrestling. Like the films are
fantastic.
Right, they're so global and they're really very specific characters, but the impetus for her to go out into the world and tell these incredible stories.
And do you remember the film that she made called, what's the one about female genital circumcision?
Oh, yeah.
Which one? The Day I'll Never Forget. And unbelievable. Do you remember there's the older sister and the mother's talking to the older sister, and the mother's saying, can you forgive me for forcing circumcision on you? And do you remember what happens? The sister says to the younger daughter, the younger sister who we haven't seen yet, she says, Mother, I'll forgive you as long as you don't do the same to her. And Kim's camera, I can't remember her co-director show, as a co-director, it just goes over to this little girl and said, please don't make that mistake again. You know, I mean, so really, Kim is so great, isn't it?
And films that just opened your eyes up to very different places in the world. Her films especially, I feel like really continued to do that every time you saw a new one.
And when we think of Britain in the world, of course it was Britain and the US that forced Mossadegh out of government in Iran in the 50s. And so you could argue that it's Britain and the US that caused some of the problems that happened in 79, etc. And of course Iran, what's happening now. So I think this film is so important. Even though it's about Iran, we all have to understand a film like this, I think.
Yeah, it's history.
Touching the Void, Kevin MacDonald. What I loved about this film is, now we have the thriller doc, as we know, all the time we see docs which are pumping and trying to get our hearts beating faster. This is one of the earlier examples of this, but it's really, really good. Unlike some of them, Yeah, and particularly what I loved about this film, it was the use of the wide-angle lenses. You remember the lens was so wide, so when you pan on a wide-angle lens, the world seems to bulge around you. It looks as if it's responding to the camera in some way, and the ethics of this film, as you know, it's one guy above and another guy dangling by a thread and deciding to cut the rope. And so this film, we're in the 2000s now, and somewhere around late 1990s, documentary went from the ne'er-do-well genre, like we love it, but it's not sexy and nobody's going to see it in the cinema, to suddenly, oh my goodness, programmers were taking fiction films off the screen in order to put docs on the screen. And this took like 19 million or something, which was a lot of money.
And this, to see this film in a cinema was incredible, but it played and played. And I guess, One Day in September as well, that also kind of predates this, but has that thriller element. But this is, it's gut-wrenching to watch this film.
Another film about sound. This is Evelyn Glennie, the brilliant Scottish musician who's got hearing loss. I don't know if she's fully deaf, but a brilliant, brilliant percussionist. And we start the film in this way where she's going boom, 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 boom. We actually start even closer so we don't see her head. And then we pull out and out and out, steady cam again, out and out and out, directed by Thomas Reidelsheimer. And look at where we are now, the camera, and she's going boom, 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 boom. And if you see this in the cinema, the sound is like, my goodness. So it's like very archetypal, and it's just one of the great films about an artist, in this case a musician, I think, and I wanted to talk about sound a lot, I guess, and this I love. Another film about sound, what's this one called again? The Intimacy of Strangers, Eva Weber's film. Eva's, I think, here, I think she's here, I think she's a great filmmaker, and you look at this image and you think, what's this about? Is it about the bus? Is it about this? Is it about this? It's about this person here, and she's on her phone, and she's saying, you've got a wife. I'm not seeing you anymore. You've got a wife in Turkey. But look how far back the camera is. Like, the camera's way back here.
So it's this really intimate conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this film is about the era of mobile phones. And so Eva eavesdrops on people from a great distance. I don't know what she did permissions-wise to have to do, but that sense that, when you're on a train and there's somebody down the train talking on their phone, this was one of the first films and one of the greatest films about that.
And so she follows multiple people.
Yeah, the camera doesn't move once, so we never get close to people. It's always on a tripod, always far back. People are on the phone. Sometimes we hear another phone call over the top of the one that we're seeing, etc. That kind of utterly static but brilliantly interested in sound goes right back to Humphrey Jennings' Listen to Britain. This film could be called Listen to Britain post mobile phones. And then we started in Wales with Conwy Castle, and this is Sleep Furiously. Gideon Couples, beautiful film. His parents came from Germany during World War II. Jewish people went to Wales, started living in Wales, and started to feel that they belonged to Wales. And this film is about belonging. It's again wide. No camera. I can't remember any camera moves. All tripods. Watching people hanging out there washing, and the sun hits the line. But look at the depth of field here. I mean, that looks as if it's a single line there, doesn't it?
And is this another kind of example of a film that's like incredibly domestic, saying something big about the world?
Yes, there's a little yellow library van that goes through, and then the guy who runs the van is having to use a computer, and he's a gentleman of a certain age, and he's struggling, so it's a coming of modernity and technology into everyday life. So it's a pastoral film, and again, like Listen to Britain or something like that, these films that are asking, what's the difference between timelessness and the moment? And this one really, really asks that. And it was widely acclaimed, and I think Gideon now teaches in quite a few places, but I remember seeing it, I think again, I can't remember, but we might have given it the premiere in Edinburgh, but it felt as if it was about the 1930s in some way, except...
Yeah, I mean, even the image feels...
Yeah, those last two films really talk to each other. It's about like what is new technology adding to the diurnal rhythms of life. You know what this one is, don't you? 20,000 Days on Earth. And what I loved about this film is about Nick Cave and about his creative process, you remember. And it's supposed to be one day in his life, but it's real. And of course, Kylie Minogue's in the back seat. And that's like a dreamscape there, isn't it? It's almost like he's imagining her. Do you remember that image from earlier, Listen to Britain, with a woman standing behind the painting? It's almost like the background is your dreamscape, and here it is again. But what I love is it really tries to tell us how Nick Cave imagines, and he talks about the shimmering space in which where reality and imagination interact.
Yeah, and it's one of the most exceptionally interesting films about the creative process as well. I think all of their films, the Jane and Ian Pollard have just made a terrific film, Broken English, which is about Marianne Faithfull.
Fantastic.
But they're such clever and amazing filmmakers because, I don't know that anyone else has done a portrait of an artist that's just, as in, you don't need to know anything or care about Nick Cave to be interested by the film.
I think so. We're nearly finished. Almost all the clips are done. Asif Kapadia's film Amy. What I loved about this film is, it's obviously about Amy Winehouse and the process through which she was cannibalized by the media, totally, turned into a sort of like cubist painting by the media.
Sort of a clownish figure of herself. Yeah.
But I love that Asif used her words on screen. So all throughout, it feels as if after her death, she was the screenwriter. Like she's telling her own story, and to dignify with using her words on screen, I thought it was a beautiful way of co-authoring. Asif and Amy sort of co-authored the film, I thought.
Yeah, and such a... I mean, the ending of this film is really one of those, you stay in your cinema seat and you just need a moment. It's a beautifully constructed film. Yeah.
And talking about landscape, we've seen a few landscape films. This is a Scottish landscape film by a guy called Duncan Cowles. I think the film is 2 minutes long, or so it's not very long. And he shows all these beautiful landscapes. And people go to Scotland and they film landscapes, and it's always about the beauty of the landscapes. And he looks at this landscape and goes... And he looks again and goes... And this film's called Skyscape, and it's like, for God's sake, I'm sick of looking at landscapes, And it's quietly radical, and it's funny. filmmakers from around the world go to Scotland or Wales or the Lake District and fall in love with the landscapes. What if we are sick of those landscapes? Brilliant idea. And another landscape, but a very different one. Steve McQueen, Grenfell.
To see this is, this is heartbreaking to watch this work, but it is like probably one of the most essential things of the last decade to see. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think so, because he's saying, like, I don't know where the tower is here, this image, but you start wide, in the green and pleasant land, and you just say, look at this. We're on a helicopter, we're floating across this place, which we live in and we believe in, and whether we talk about Britain or Ireland, and yet as we get closer and closer, there's lots of sound in this moment, but as we get closer and closer to the tower where 72 people has died, is that right? Then the sound ebbs and it becomes almost sepulchral. Is that the word? It's almost like a cenotaph, I think, and
yeah, and the you circle the building.
Yeah.
And it's quite meditative, and
Absolutely.
your brain really wanders.
Yeah.
But it's
a stupid thing, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really fantastic, And the last image is from Myrid Carton's most recent film, a young Northern Irish filmmaker called A Wanton Her. It's about her mother. We've seen many, many, many films about alcoholism, and this is one of the best, I think, Kristy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very. Obviously, it's a tough film, but it's also there's just so much deep emotion in the film. I think it's really one of the best films that was made. Period last year, but certainly one of the best films that came from the UK last year.
Yeah, or Ireland as well. Yes,
Yes.
I know. Yeah. And I think that what's interesting is her mom, because she's drinking a lot, keeps forgetting that she's agreed to be in the film. And so there's the sadness of that. And Myrid says, "You remember you said yes," and her mom says, "Why are you filming her?" What I love about this is the cinematographer put the camera on like a boom pole, like a big long pole.
Wow.
And so there's a toilet here, and that's the cistern. So the camera starts in there, then pulls up, then goes around the ceiling, and then comes down. And there's no really clear reason for that, but it so works. And you realize that it's a portrait of the house in which her mum grew up and through which her sadness emerged or was incubated in a way. So I particularly love that film.
And I think that, like I said, it's a tough subject, and it's a tough but very satisfying watch. But in making this enormous scale of film, how have you dealt with watching a lot of tough things? Because not all documentaries are about tough things, but I'm sure over the course of doing this, you've seen some tough stuff.
Yeah, in the 16-hour story of documentary film, I only dissolved a black once. So there's an early film made in New Jersey about an elephant being electrocuted, and I felt we didn't need to see that moment. We see just, so I felt we didn't, but nothing else is censored through the whole way. And, from my point of view, watching that stuff, it was... I cried in the edit suite a lot, and I think I got pretty flat. And there was one point I said to my producer, John, he's gone to a thing. I said to my producer, John, and my editor, warning, and this is the only warning I'll give you the whole film, but this footage from Bangladesh in 1971, 72, it's so awful that, if you don't want to watch it, I will do this sequence myself. So it's tough, a documentary is brilliant. I felt inspired, but I also felt over the 4-year period quite worn down by confronting these realities all the time.
And in terms of the process, I'm sure there's a million, documentary cinema is probably the most exciting part of the form of cinema. And
I think so.
It's genres, it's makers. But why now, and why documentary? And
yeah, that's a good question. I've always been interested in documentary, and I did a book with Kevin MacDonald in the mid-90s. I think that I have long argued that filmmaking is not about self-expression. It's really not that I have this kind of brilliant inner world that I want to share with you. You know, I think it's sort of what Gertrude Stein says, which is the opposite of that. Like, she was talking about painting, but I think filmmaking is about noticing what's out there in the world and then filtering it through your own sensibility. Gertrude Stein says it's observation plus construction. And I think that's a better way around. You start with the outside and go inwards. And if that's true, if Gertie is right, and I think she is, then that's why documentary is so exciting, I think. You know, we started this before the swing right politically in a number of countries, but during it that was happening, you know, and so that's why there's quite a lot of India in this film, for example. And so it felt as if we were arriving at a moment of real concern, moral concern and social concern.
And the thing that's quite, I mean, as you go through the film, like I said, you know, it's chronological, so it's wonderful because as the film continues, you as a viewer can sort of go, oh yes, I remember this, I've seen this bit. It's lovely when you see films in the film that you've seen because it's like I've said to you before, it's like you have a conversation with the film, but the level of curiosity in the film is like, it's so delicious and joyful watching it because there's so many things that you're like, I've never seen this sounds amazing. And going into the process, did this just keep happening like again and again as you were making the film?
Yes. And that makes you feel great, even if you're discovering bad stuff. You know, that if you're discovering that throughout the period of film history, like 130 years, people were encountering some of the same problems and trying to use the language of cinema to express those problems and capture them for other human beings. There's an intrinsic hopefulness in the nature of filming this stuff, you know, with a few exceptions. I think most of these filmmakers are trying to say, look, this is valuable. You know, if this, what you could call the Z-axis the Z-axis in mathematics, you know, it's the X, Y, and the Z is the empathy axis. It's, you know, that Muhammad Ali poem, Me, We, you know, that's where that's documentary is the Z-axis, and it's always about trying to connect with something, and that's why it's one of the many reasons to love it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you know, in the last decade, but certainly the last 5 years, there's been a lot more conversation about the ethics of documentary and how people make films and who they make them with. It's something that you bring in quite early in the documentary and it surfaces, you know, throughout a lot of the commentary. So I wondered if that was a big thing for you going in and how you reframe things.
I feel a lot of people in the academic world and the scholarly world spend a lot of time discussing the ethics, which is great. Those of us who are filmmakers, and I know lots of us are, you know, we've got practical things to address, but there's the Hippocratic Oath is don't lie to the audience, or at least you can lie during the film, but fess up at the end. You know, if the audience leaves the theatre having been lied to, then that's wrong. You know, it's fun to play with them and lie to them the whole way along, and I do it a number of times, but fess up at the end. That's the simple ethical foundation stone, and then there are variations on that thereafter.
And the other thing that I'm keen to understand is throughout the film, there's you know, obviously we see all the clips from these movies, but there's all these wonderful sequences that you, I assume, have filmed of
Yes.
traveling, being in spaces that relate to what we're seeing. Is that done over the course of while you're making the film?
Yes.
And how did you kind of map that out?
I thought that each decade or each era should be rooted in a certain place, and some of them are really obvious, like the 1930s and 40s because of fascism was Germany. The 1990s because of the Balkan Wars was Sarajevo. The 1950s I shot. All these in-between shots are all in east of Egypt in Islamia because of the decolonizing of Africa. So each era I tried to root it in one location, Kristy, and then we can jump around from that.
And I know that when you did the story of film, you had your beautiful paper edit.
Yeah.
Have you kept this? Can you explain the paper edit technique?
It's over there. Would you like to see it?
Yes, it's kind of incredible to see this. object.
Oh, it's locked. Is it locked?
Wait.
So those of you who are filmmakers, you'll know that, you know, you can try and plan on a computer, you know, but a computer's only this big, and your film is the size of this wall or this room, and so most of the time you will not be seeing most of your film. So the bigger sheet of paper you can get and sketch your film roughly, like a child doodles something, like then you have a visual reference, and you kind of know where you are. If you make a film like this, it's 4 years of editing, then you have to be able to see where you are in the story. It's in the back thing there, I think, Jill. You have to see where you are at the moment, because if you're 3 years into an edit, you have to think, 2 years ago, did I refer to something? You know, and you know, not that one, Jilly. It's the, this is it here. Can you help me unfold it? So to have the master plan, as it were, you know, means that you don't get lost. And the thing is, as we know creatively, those of us, you sort of you sort of want to get lost, you know. You do creatively, you want to get lost, but also you want to find where you are. So the bit of this film that played here in Cannes yesterday was that bit. Just
wow.
that bit. And the bit that played in Sundance was just that bit, you know. So it meant this is like an old sheet of paper and it's falling apart, but it was my lodestar. And I have to say that, Kristy, you really helped me. I asked your advice about Australian cinema, and so there's quite a lot of Australian in here. That's thanks to you, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
But it's kind of incredible to see. And so you keep this, but you're working with the same editor. You have an editor that you collaborate with. And do they have their own version of this?
He never sees this.
Oh,
he just sees the he sees the edit script. So, you know, it used to be called a paper edit, where you do a really, really detailed thing. And so the script for this paper edit was like 500 pages or something, with time codes, ins and outs, and the whole. I was brought up an old school way to save money, and it really works. It means that you don't spend ages editing a sequence that doesn't work, so you dump it. That never happens, because you've worked it out on paper.
But it must be lovely to, you know, your producer, John, your editor, you have these collaborators who you return to. So that must have a great comfort as you're embarking on a film project.
It really short circuits it a lot, you know, and it means that over the years you build trust between the immediate team, but also you build trust with the film archives around the world. So when we made Story of Film with the brilliant Tabitha Jackson, who's in the front row here, all these years ago, the film archives started to trust us. And then we made the Women Make Film project. They already knew that we had, you know, asked them for film clips. They provided them. We used them well and had an impact, crucially. So by the time we made the third History of Cinema, which is the story of documentary film, the archives were gagging to work with us, frankly. You know, they really wanted to, because they thought, my goodness, this might play Cannes or Sundance or Berlin, you know, and that kind of visibility for an archive is very valuable, because they all want to celebrate their great filmmakers.
And certainly in the watching of the film, you know, the clips are beautiful. I mean, the editing of those clips, because you're selecting this much of a whole film, and you make it look very easy in the film, but I'm sure this is many hours of you and your editor really working hard to choose those clips.
I choose all the clips, and what's interesting is, like, I don't know if others think this, but you know, if you run a marathon, you're really tired. If you spend all day trying to select a moment from a film, take it out, try to drop it into another narrative, and see the themes in that film, and then drop it into your own film and try to connect that and weave that into something, your head is exhausted, you know. You feel as if you're doing heavy lifting, and I suppose you are in a way, you know. So it's, you know, and I know it's literally not running a marathon, but for me, I'm really exhausted and so hungry after a day of doing that, you know.
I can imagine, because it's such...
Not one pizza, two.
deep mental work. We have time for questions. If anyone in the audience, there's a microphone. If you can wait for that, that would be terrific.
Hello, Kristy, and hello, Mark. Thanks for all your amazing insights. Mark, I saw your film at the Cameo a couple of years ago about the rise of Mussolini, which I thought was really amazing.
Thank you.
So I'm William Grave, the founder of the Human Made Mark. So we certify and celebrate the fact that a film has human talent in front of the camera and behind the camera. I've noticed some documentaries, even on Channel 4, whatever it might be, for reconstructions. I've noticed some documentaries are starting to use generative AI instead of casting actors or even animated sequences. That's when I've made films in the past, I've worked with animators when I've done a documentary. I'd love to hear about your feeling in terms of the ethics of using generative AI to do a reconstruction. Because I know in that film I referred to, I know you worked with an actress in a certain scene as part of a reconstruction.
We shot in Cinecittà in the vast set of Federico Fellini, and there was a crew of 40 people. My answer is quite simple. It's wrong to use generative AI. For me, another question which is more relevant to me, to be honest, is that if AI can do a not bad job at some things, how can I do a better job? And so, for example, early in this project, I asked AI, what is the history of documentary cinema? And it basically spat out at me a summary of a book that Kevin MacDonald and I did in the mid-90s. So by that stage, I thought, how can I tell a story that AI would never think of telling? So last night, the chapter that showed here in Cannes, a history of the 1970s documentaries, nobody would have expected the first film clip to be Grease with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. AI would never do that. And so we have to stay ahead, and it's exactly what painters realized in the 1830s when photography came along. That can do that. And so what can we do that it can't do? There's that lovely word in Russian, ostranani. How do we show something with new eyes? I think AI, whatever it can do, and we're talking about in the creative field here, it can't show us things with new eyes. It can compile a summary of the eyes that there have already been.
Thank you, that's a beautiful answer.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah, so over here and then down here.
You touched briefly on archival footage there. I was just curious, was that, this is more because I'm currently going through the process of sourcing archival material. Have you now established a relationship where that's now free for you when you do this, so you don't have to budget for that? Or initially when you did it on the first project, was it like a huge budget in place to get that?
So I use hardly any actual archive. I use clips from films, and there we use the fair use, fair dealing mechanism, and we started doing that a long time ago, and I think it's really ethical way of working, because I always say that if a Hollywood studio makes a film and wants to get inside our heads and play with our emotions and our desires, we have the right to analyze that. It's an ethical right, so that's what we do.
We have a question down here.
Hi.
Hi. So I have a question regarding basically the form of documentary. Like, I can see that you're very focused on the point of view in documentary, on the angle, and not just on the content. And I'm curious to see how, like recently with, for example, Netflix, we see a lot of documentaries that are very formulaic. They really follow a formula and like a recipe. They're literally built almost like, it looks like the same edit with different content replacing, And I'm wondering, how do you see this evolution of documentary? Do you think it's kind of damaging for the world of documentary, or do you see it as a positive thing or as a negative?
It's interesting, the word evolution, which suggests a move forward.
Involution.
Might be a move backwards.
Yeah. How do you say involution?
I think that the question is always the same. How do we show something with new eyes? The great Robert Bresson said, try to show that which without you might never have been seen? What can you show me about the world that I haven't seen myself? And formulae are the enemy of that kind of thing. You know, sometimes, you know, a kind of classic story structure can help you if you're lost in an edit, but most of the time we're looking to surprise people. Certainly as an audience member, I don't want to be ahead of the film. Yeah, I want to be behind the film. Like if I know what's happening next and then that, not only in story terms, but in style terms, it's like, no, yeah, I don't need to see this, you know? And I think that most people feel the same. I always say the same thing, like I bored everybody by saying, nobody knew that they wanted David Bowie. Like if you had asked the audience, do you want David Bowie? Do you want somebody like this? They would have said no, but then he came along and people loved it because he stretched their imagination like mozzarella cheese, you know? So that's what our job is, to stretch the audience's knowledge, imagination, desires, you know, like mozzarella cheese. So the formulae, you know, let's say as filmmakers, we could do that in our sleep.
And I mean, curiosity sits at the center of all your work, but this in particular, you've now had the opportunity to present elements of this whole project to different audiences all around the world. And I'd love to know how those audiences have reacted, because there would be differences, there would be similarities, but it'd be lovely to hear how this journey of rolling the film out is going.
The thing that I've noticed is people like the connections. They like how global it is, first of all, you know, but they also like the connections. So, for example, in the 1980s, I'm looking at music documentaries, and I'm sure you can imagine we've got the brilliant Stop Making Sense, directed by Jonathan Demme, etc. And so people expect that. And then we cut to Drupan, which is a brilliant film directed by Manny Cowell. And then I cut to that moment in Taxi Driver where the camera, Robert De Niro's on the phone and the camera tracks away. And then we cut to another music film. So people are enjoying those unexpected jumps because they have to make sense. You know, they can't just be random jumps. But if you're saying like performance is something like that, like this in Stop Making Sense, then in India we see something similar, and this Indian film reminds us of almost the pain of looking, which is what that phone call is in Taxi Driver. Then you join the dots, and so I think that's hopefully what it seems to me that's what audiences are responding to.
I mean, it's kind of the pleasure of the film, is you're sort of inside your head, you know, and it really is, you know, I think it's a really joyful watch because you're really excited by the curiosity of it. But it's also just, it's so vast. Is there one film that kind of, obviously there's never one film, but one film where you were like, all right, I am going to embark on this project? Because how long has this production?
It's roughly 4 years of shooting and editing. Yeah, there are certain films, like there's certain filmmakers like Atayat Al-Abnoudi, the great Egyptian director, and I love her work, you know. But there's one film that comes to mind. It's The Last Testament of Hertz Frank, the great Latvian director. And it's about a young man who's on death row, and he's committed a crime, and he accepts that he's committed a crime and his head shaved, and the last interview we get with him, he says to the filmmaker, I can't remember the exact words, but he said, remember, life is about love. And this is the last thing he says before he is potentially killed. And it's so moving and so brilliant. Hertz Frank was one of the real greats.
Well, it is an incredible watch. And over this course of this year, many audiences all around the world will get to see parts of it. But when will people be able to see the whole piece?
Well, we're just announcing some sales, I think today or tomorrow. So hopefully, and we hope that that'll spur more as well. So then those countries can show it however they want, in marathon sessions in cinemas, streamers on TV or whatever. Educational work, of course, very, very valuable in that area. So hopefully people can experience it as they wish.
Just one other thing I'd love to know is, obviously with the story of film, we have the film, but we had the book first. Do you feel like there'll be a written companion to this film?
I've just been approached by a publisher to do a book version of it. To be honest, I'm knackered with documentary. I never want to see another documentary in my life. That's not true. That is really, really, really not true. But, you know, but I need at least a little pause before I dive into it again. And there's loads and loads of things I didn't go into in this 16-hour film, so I'd love to.
Well, would you please thank Mark for joining us today?